Have you ever felt that suffocating weight in your chest when someone's disapproval lands on you like a physical blow? Have you ever noticed how you shrink yourself, dim your light, and apologize for taking up space in this world? Maybe you've wondered why that voice in your head sounds suspiciously like everyone except yourself. You're not broken. You're not weak. You are living under the tyranny of what Friedrich Nietzsche called vicious shame. Shame that targets the unchangeable essence of who you are. This isn't the healthy shame that guides social behavior. This is the soul-crushing shame that makes you believe you are fundamentally flawed. Here's what really happens when shame takes root in your psyche. It doesn't just make you feel bad about something you did. It rewrites your entire identity. You begin to live as if you are a problem to be solved, rather than a person to be expressed. But let me tell you something that will shake the foundation of everything you've been told about yourself. Nietzsche discovered that most of our shame isn't even ours. It's been systematically installed by what he called the slave revolt in morality. For centuries, you've been taught to feel ashamed of your power, your desires, your authentic nature. The psychological research confirms what Nietzsche intuited over a century ago. Toxic shame creates a persistent sense of self-doubt and criticism that stems from painful experiences, negatively impacting self-esteem, relationships, and emotional health. This shame becomes a vicious cycle where you feel ashamed of having shame. That's where the point lies. Nietzsche wasn't interested in eliminating shame entirely. He understood it served crucial functions in human psychology. But he made a revolutionary distinction that modern psychology is only now catching up to. Shame directed at fixed aspects of your nature is vicious and destructive, while shame that motivates growth toward your authentic self can be transformative. Think about this. When you feel shame about being human, about having desires, needing connection, expressing creativity, you're experiencing what Nietzsche called the most dangerous form of psychological poison. This type of shame doesn't make you better. It makes you smaller. But here's what changes everything. Nietzsche discovered that you have the power to create counter-shame against those forces that would diminish your authentic nature. When someone tries to make you ashamed of your genuine self, you can turn that shame back on them and say, "No, it is shameful to ask me to be less than who I am." Modern psychology has validated Nietzsche's insights through decades of research on shame resilience and authentic living. The path forward isn't about eliminating all shame. It's about distinguishing between constructive and destructive shame, then using that awareness to fuel your self-creation. The journey begins with recognition. That moment when you stop and realize that the voice telling you you're not enough isn't actually yours. You've been carrying someone else's verdict about your worth, and you can choose to set it down. Understanding the origins comes next, where you explore how these messages took root in your psyche. This isn't about blame, it's about recognizing that shame is learned, which means it can be unlearned. The breakthrough happens when you begin challenging the fixed beliefs that keep you trapped. Nietzsche called this process becoming who you are, not discovering some hidden self, but actively creating the person you choose to be. But the truth needs to be said. Reading about authentic living won't set you free. Only living authentically will. This requires what Nietzsche called will to power. Not power over others, but the power to create yourself according to your own values. The difference between shame-based living and authentic living becomes crystal clear when you examine how they show up in your daily choices. Shame-based living asks, "What will others think?" While authentic living asks, "What aligns with my values?" You cannot become authentic by following someone else's blueprint for authenticity. Nietzsche understood that each person's path to wholeness is unique. Your true self isn't a destination to reach, but a continuous creation to express. Maybe it's time to stop apologizing for being human. Maybe it's time to feel ashamed of settling for less than your full expression. This is what Nietzsche meant by counter shame, directing your shame toward the forces that keep you small, rather than toward your authentic nature. When you encounter someone who tries to shame you for being too much, too intense, too authentic, that's precisely when you practice what Nietzsche called sacred no. You protect your authentic self with the same fierceness that shame once used to diminish it. The eternal recurrence test becomes your compass. If you had to live this exact moment over and over for eternity, would you choose it gladly? Choices made from shame fail this test every time, while authentic choices energize you at the thought of infinite repetition. Your liberation awaits. Here's what happens when you break free from the prison of inherited shame. You don't just feel better about yourself, you become a living example of what's possible for others. Your authentic expression gives others permission to step into their own truth. The journey isn't easy, but it's infinitely more rewarding than the exhausting performance of trying to be acceptable to everyone. Every moment you choose authenticity over approval, you reclaim another piece of your soul. Remember Nietzsche's most profound insight. Your true self isn't hiding somewhere deep inside waiting to be discovered. Your true self is the conscious creation of a person who refuses to be ashamed of their humanity. You have the power to transform your relationship with shame from a weapon used against you into a compass guiding you toward your highest expression. The only question remaining is, will you use it? The chains of shame are strong, but your will to authentic self-expression is stronger. It's time to become who you are. Have you ever felt like you're living someone else's life? Have you noticed how you automatically smile when you're dying inside? Or how you say, "I'm fine," when everything is falling apart? What you're experiencing isn't weakness. It's what psychologist Donald Winnicott called the false self. And it's the most sophisticated prison ever designed. Here's what really happens when shame takes root early in your life. You don't just develop coping mechanisms. You develop an entirely different person. This false self becomes so convincing, so polished, so successful in navigating the world that even you forget it's a performance. But here's the devastating truth. While your false self is out there achieving and pleasing and performing, your true self is suffocating in the basement of your psyche. Winnicott discovered that this false self develops when children learn that their authentic responses aren't safe or welcome. Instead of risking rejection, they create a compliant version of themselves, one that anticipates what others want and delivers it flawlessly. The tragedy isn't that this strategy works. The tragedy is that it works too well. But let me tell you something that will revolutionize how you understand that nagging voice that whispers, "You don't belong here." Most people think imposter syndrome is about feeling inadequate. But what if it's actually your authentic self trying to break free from a life that doesn't fit? Think about this. When do you feel most like a fraud? Is it when you're genuinely incompetent? Or is it when you're succeeding at something that doesn't align with your core values? The imposter feeling might not be signaling your inadequacy. It might be signaling your inauthenticity. Modern research reveals that many high achievers experience imposter syndrome not because they lack skills, but because they lack meaning. They've become so skilled at performing the role society expects that they've lost touch with what their soul actually wants to create. When others celebrate your success in a life you never chose, of course, you feel like a fraud. Carl Jung understood what Nietzsche intuited. You are not the mask you wear to survive in society. Jung called this mask the persona. And like Nietzsche's false shame, it serves a function until it becomes a prison. Every day, you put on different masks. The professional mask at work, the dutiful child mask with family, the cool friend mask with peers. But here's where the danger lies. When you've worn these masks so long that you've forgotten there's a face underneath. Jung discovered that the persona is a complicated system of relations between individual consciousness and society. It's how you compromise your authentic nature to fit social expectations. The persona isn't evil, it's necessary. But when it becomes your entire identity, you lose access to the vast landscape of who you actually are. And that is precisely where toxic shame reveals its most insidious trick. Shame doesn't just make you feel bad about who you are, it makes you feel guilty for being bad. This creates what psychologists call the shame-guilt fusion, where you're trapped in a double prison, ashamed of your nature and guilty for having that shame. The difference between healthy guilt and toxic shame is revolutionary when you understand it. Guilt says, I made a mistake. Shame says, I am a mistake. Guilt motivates corrective action. Shame motivates self-erasure. Modern trauma research confirms what Nietzsche suspected. Toxic shame often develops from repeated early experiences where your authentic self was met with rejection, criticism, or abandonment. Your psyche learned that being yourself was dangerous, so it created an elaborate system to ensure you'd never risk that authentic expression again. But here's what changes everything about how you understand your shame. Most of the voices criticizing you aren't even yours. Jung's concept of the collective unconscious reveals that many of your shame messages come from the accumulated psychological patterns of your culture, family, and society. You've been carrying generations of inherited shame about human nature, creativity, sexuality, ambition, and authentic expression. Nietzsche called this the slave revolt in morality, where natural human impulses are systematically shamed to maintain social control. Every time you feel ashamed of your desire for freedom, pleasure, or self-expression, you're experiencing someone else's agenda for your life. The revolutionary insight is this: you can choose which voices get to have authority in your inner landscape. When that familiar shame spiral starts, you can ask, whose voice is this? What agenda does this serve? Is this mine to carry? That's where Brené Brown's research on shame resilience meets Nietzsche's philosophy of self-creation. Shame resilience isn't about eliminating shame. It's about transforming shame into a compass that guides you toward authenticity rather than away from it. Brown discovered that shame-resilient people share 4 key practices that mirror Nietzsche's insights. They recognize shame triggers, reach out for support, speak shame stories, and choose courage over comfort. But what she calls shame resilience, Nietzsche would call the will to power over your own psyche. The moment you recognize shame arising, you have a choice. Will you allow it to drive you into hiding, or will you use it as information about what needs your attention? Shame becomes a teacher when you stop being its student and start being its investigator. Maybe it's time to recognize that your commitment to authenticity is not selfish. It's sacred rebellion against the forces that would keep humanity small. Every time you choose authentic expression over safe performance, you're not just healing yourself. You're healing the collective wound that says human nature is fundamentally flawed. Nietzsche understood that becoming authentic requires what he called sacred selfishness, not narcissistic self absorption, but the fierce commitment to honoring your true nature even when others find it threatening. This isn't about being rude or inconsiderate. It's about refusing to apologize for taking up the space your soul requires. The path forward isn't about perfection, it's about integration. It's about reclaiming the exiled parts of yourself and bringing them home to your conscious identity. It's about choosing vulnerability over invulnerability, authenticity over approval, and truth over comfort. Your true self isn't waiting to be discovered, it's waiting to be chosen. Every moment offers the opportunity to select authenticity over performance, truth over safety, and your own voice over the inherited chorus of limitation. The question isn't whether you're worthy of authentic living. The question is whether you're brave enough to claim it.